Hello everybody, welcome. We're talking about section 7.5 on proportion and variation. And this is an area where people tend to get confused, mainly due to the fact that it does involve fractions, and having a good handle on the definitions is a really important thing for us. So let's start off with a couple of quick uh, definitions that you'll have to know as we go through this material and as you go through the homework. The first one is the definition of what's called a ratio. And a ratio is a quotient of two quantities that have the same units. As an example, let's say that group A uses 360 man-hours, which is a measure of the number of hours people working together to complete a task. Group A uses 360 man-hours to complete a task, while Group B uses 540 man-hours to complete the task. What is the ratio of Group A's to Group B's man-hours to complete the task? Well, what we're really asking you to do is to consider the idea that when we have man-hours, we have a ratio of two quantities that have the same units, in this case, man-hours. So we talk about man-hours, 540 to 360. We say, what is the ratio of Group A's to Group B's task to complete the task? Well, we build a ratio this way. So we say that if we take Group A, they had 360 man-hours, which I'll abbreviate as MH here, and Group B had 540 man-hours, again, which I'll abbreviate as MH for our purposes. And you'll notice that as long as the units match in the numerator and denominator, it's almost as if we can just simply cancel them out, and we're left with a ratio. We're left with a ratio that we will want to reduce. Well, 360 divided by 540, first of all, both of those numbers are divisible by 10. They end in 0, so we would have 36 over 54. And we try to think, well, what is another number that we know both are divisible by? And to me, of course, I see 9 right away, right? If we divide by 9, in each case, what happens? Well, let's see. 36 divided by 9 is 4. 54 divided by 9 is 6. We can reduce one more time, right? 4 over 6 reduces by dividing by 2, which means that our actual ratio would be 2/3. Right, so that's our ratio right there. Now there's another definition right here about what's called a proportion. A proportion is different from a ratio in that a proportion is an equation that states that two ratios or two rates are equal to one another. For example, consider these two right triangles A and B. In both of these cases, we contain all the same angles, right? It's a right triangle. So we would say that the corresponding sides are proportional to one another. So if I wanted to figure out, well, what is the length of side x, if I knew these proportions, well, then we could say that the ratio of x meters to 6 meters is equal to the ratio of 3 meters to 4 meters. That is, the two ratios are proportional, or they have a proportion right here. Well, okay, so x is to 6 as 3 is to 4. Multiplying both sides by the common denominator would help us solve this equation. Of course, you recognize this as a rational equation, so we multiply both sides by the same denominator, and we get x equals 3 over 4 times 6, and I'm going to treat this as 6 over 1, divide out my common factor of 2, so that makes this 3 divided by 2, which means that x is equal to 9/2, right? So x is going to be, well, if we were to actually work this out, x would be 9/2 meters right here, which is to say 4.5 meters. But our ratio, notice that our ratio of meters to meters, this one cancels out. We just take that extra proportion of 6 meters and multiply that onto the other side. That's how we get this. Okay, so far so good. So ratio is just simply a quotient of two quantities, while a proportion is an equation that looks at two ratios or two rates. that are similar to one another. Here's a good example. Let's talk about proportions in solving a problem like this. In a wildlife preserve, 60 deer are captured, tagged, and released. And later, 200 deer are examined, and we find 8 of them have tags. So let's estimate the number of deer in the preserve. So in a word problem like this, we always want to define what we mean by our variable. So let's make x equal the number of deer in the preserve. Well, what can we say? Well, we could say that if there are 60 deer that are captured, tagged, and released, right, then the number of deer in the preserve should be proportional to the number that have tags, right? So let's take a look at this. What do we say? Well, we found that 8 deer have tags, and that 200 of those deer have been examined, right? So, okay, that should tell us what proportion we have if we know that if we made sure that we had 60 deer with tags, to estimate the proportion of deer that we have, well, if there's 60, if there are 8 that we captured, then there's 60 out there roaming around and an unknown number of deer in the entire preserve. Well, there is our proportion, right? 8 to 200 would be the same as 60 to x. So that's the one we would have to solve. So, well, let's work this through. How would we get this? Well, if we're looking at tags, of course, as units, these are going to disappear. So we're going to say that 8 is to 200 as 60 is to x. And if we wanted to solve this equation, we could multiply both sides by 200x. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 200x. Let's see, that's going to be 1600x is equal to, let's see, the x's cancel out here. Oh, what am I doing? 200 cancels out, so really we're left with 8x. Let me revise that. Thank you. 8x is equal to 60 times 200. Well, 6 times 2 is 12, and there's 3 zeros, so 12,000. So we divide both sides by 8, and we're going to find that x is equal to 1,500, right? We do the division 8 into 1,200, 12,000, pardon me, 8 goes into 12 once, giving you 8. Subtract, you've got 4 with a 0. Bring down one of the zeros, 15. Of course, 5 multiplied by 8 is 40, and that gives us a remainder of 0. And if we just bring down our remaining zeros right here, we're going to get 1,500 as x. So there are 1,500 deer in the preserve. More in the next video.